In this section, we're going to look at the other types within neurodivergence, as it helps to have an idea what these are in relation to dyslexia. The first one we're going to look at is dyscalculia. This affects the ability to understand numbers and maths concept. Dyslexia can still impact maths because the dyslexia challenges of short-term memory, reading and sequencing can make it hard to retain basic facts, reading maths questions, being able to complete the steps needed in a maths calculation. Dyscalculia is different though and can stand on its own. It affects a person's number sense. For example, if I had 4 apples in my hand, you know that the number 4 represents those 4 apples. People with dyscalculia can struggle to see that relationship. It affects measuring money, time. It can also impact the ease for learning to drive. It's estimated that 5 to 6% of the population has dyscalculia, but there's less research about it compared to dyslexia at this stage. Dysgraphia is a specific difficulty with handwriting. It can be from how a person holds the pen, to how they form the letters on the page when writing, to how they form sentences, compared to how do they just get their thoughts down on paper. So it really impacts on their writing. If you come across someone who has poor handwriting, you may also want to consider if dyspraxia is actually the impact here rather than dysgraphia. So dyspraxia is broken into 2 parts. There's a verbal dyspraxia. This is where speech is impacted. So the person can struggle to sequence the movement of their tongue and mouth and make it harder for them to put the sound around the words they're saying. It's usually picked up early, as in young, because it's obvious. The other type that sits under dyspraxia is one that affects the motor movement. So this is the global dyspraxia. And the gross motor skills, like riding a bike and throwing a ball, walking, can be impacted, or fine motor skills such as handwriting, using scissors, or doing up buttons on clothing. It can also impact on a person's ability to organise themselves, such as getting themselves ready for school or getting their schoolwork organised. It's estimated that 5 to 6% of the population has dyspraxia. When we're looking at relationships with dyslexia, we want to look at these processing issues because there's a high instance that they can occur with someone who has dyslexia. So the first one is auditory processing. So this is when a person can have perfect hearing, but it's how their brain processes the verbal information that is the difficulty. It can impact on being able to follow verbal instructions easily. It can impact on a person's ability to focus on what a person is saying. And it impacts on how much time they need to understand information that is given to them verbally. It's estimated about 2% of the population has auditory processing disorder. When working with dyslexics, my experience is that they will have some issue with auditory processing, and so we need to accommodate accordingly. The other type of processing issue is affecting visual processing. So it's like visual stress, and it can arise from a number of factors such as poor eye tracking or different eye focusing abilities. However, there is one where the processing of the brain, it struggles to understand what it's seeing. So it's not an eye issue, like a visual issue. The person can have perfect vision it's how their brain is processing what it sees. So this is where it's Erlen syndrome is the name that it's given to it. And it can be controversial because one camp says that there's no evidence, but then on the other side, people have experienced reducing the glare, and it has meant that they can engage and read printed word. So it's keeping in mind where you sit there. But what it is we want to look at reducing the glare. So that's if there's black writing on white paper, that's when you might see coloured paper, or on a computer screen, you're making the Word document or Google Doc, the background a different colour, or you're putting a colour over your whole computer screen. Just a wee note here that the dyslexia does not have a visual processing component to it. Dyslexia is a language processing issue. So if there's any type of visual stress like this with the impact on the glare, then that is a separate issue. One thing to note with the slides with the information I'm presenting, I'm very careful with the font that is being used, also the no white in the background, and just giving a lot of space around the writing that's on the screen, on the slides, which is a dyslexia-friendly approach when thinking that they could have visual stress happening for them. One thing you can do at home to check the impact of glare is, this is just checking if it's going to make a difference for how you look at print. And what you can do is get these L-shaped coloured folders, because they're transparent and they're in different colours. Get a piece of paper, a white piece of paper, and put a lot of text on it. Just type it up and print it out. And then put it into each of these different coloured folders to see if reducing the glare with colour makes it easier to look at. And if that's the case, then you can go about putting in place, reducing white on documents that you read. So the co-occurrence of other types with dyslexia can be really interesting in how it all works together for people, because sometimes just having dyslexia on its own, it is quite rare because there can be other issues happening. So 52% of dyslexics have features of dyspraxia. Approximately 40% of dyslexics have dyscalculia. That's the maths one. Then the correlation between ADHD and dyslexia is really high as well. But also that the co-occurrence of dyslexia and visual stress is between 40 to 60%. So it helps to have an understanding of how they all fit together.